So once again, hello everybody. It's Monday, it's the Deer Park, it's the Buddha Center. You've all done this before, short period of bell meditation before we get started. So let's just go ahead, get into a nice meditation posture wherever you are behind your avatar. We'll begin at the sound of the bell. I go for refuge to the Buddha, the teacher. I go for refuge to the Dharma, the teaching. I go for refuge to the Sangha, the taught. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Excuse me. I have taken refuge in the Buddha. I have taken refuge in the Dharma. I have taken refuge in the Sangha. 3 pure precepts. Cease to do harm. Do only good. Do good for others. Bodhisattva vow. However innumerable all beings are, I vow to lead them all. However inexhaustible my delusions are, I vow to extinguish them all. However immeasurable the Dharma teachings are, I vow to master them all. However endless the Buddha's way is, I vow to follow it completely. Swaha. So today I chose freedom. Actually, I chose this a while back, but freedom seems to have come up a lot these days. People talking about their freedom from doing things or not doing things or whatever. So today we're going to talk about freedom. Freedom of choice. It's been going on for thousands of years, from the Greek thinkers to the thoughts of contemporary philosophers today. This concept of freedom. It's been debated and there's been theories about it. Freedom has been sought after and freedom has been feared. But for today, we're just going to set aside all these philosophical arguments and focus on what an understanding of the realities of freedom can mean in a Buddhist practice. So we're going to take freedom and we're going to tuck it into Buddhism today. The freedom that is realized in the teachings of the Buddha, and that same freedom that each of us are capable of realizing within ourselves, is bound up in one word. And that word is if. I-F. Buddhist philosophy is based on freedom of choice that is conditioned by causal factors, or if you will, what we do if. Thoughts and actions are situationally focused in the pursuit of human flourishing. So what do we do if our thoughts and actions are situationally focused in the pursuit of human flourishing? So we're tying again freedom, freedom into human flourishing. In Buddhism, we know there is no predetermined future, there's no fate, there's no preordination. There is, though, the causal process of the universe. And that causal process manifests itself in ways that are codependent on previous actions taken by you, by others, and by the causal universe that we have to live within. You manifest in codependent ways on that same causal universe, right? It affects you the same as it affects everybody else. You can choose a course of action then, and you can stick with it or not, and that's entirely up to you. That is one of your freedoms. You are a self that is causally conditioned by a variety of internal and external factors. The way to the noble path and to this wholesome transformation that we're looking for isn't there for some and not there for others. So again, we have the freedom to pursue these things. It is a way that is open to all who set forth on it with a commitment to developing wholesome traits and dispositions. It is a personal choice that transforms into a social choice. Again, that we have the freedom to choose. In the introduction to his book, The Six Perfections, Dale S. Wright writes this, quote, excuse me, "The question my life presses upon me, whether I choose to face it directly or not, is how shall I live? As what kind of person? All of us face the task of constructing a life for ourselves, of shaping ourselves into certain kinds of people who will live lives of one kind or another, for better or for worse. Some people undertake this task deliberately. They make choices in life in view of an image of the kind of person they would hope to become. From the early beginnings of their tradition, Buddhists have maintained that nothing is more important than developing the freedom implied in their activity of self-cultivation, of deliberately shaping the kind of life you will live. For Buddhists, this is the primary responsibility and opportunity that human beings have. It is, they claim, our singular freedom, a freedom available to no other beings in the universe. And although circumstances beyond anyone's control will make very different possibilities available for different people, Buddhists have always recognized that the difference between those who assume the task of self-sculpting with imagination, integrity, and courage, and those who do not is enormous, constituting in Buddhism the difference between enlightened ways of being in the world and unenlightened ways." Unquote. So Dale Wright is pointing at our singular freedom. Now he says a freedom available to no other beings in the universe. We don't really know that. We do know that it's a freedom available to no other beings on this planet. We certainly know that for sure. But again, he's pointing to this freedom that we have as Buddhists, but we also have to be frank about it. It's freedom that all human beings have. We just have to realize it. Hello, Faye. A closer look at the teachings of the Buddha allows us to recognize the type of freedom that he was illuminating for us. It was a freedom of choice that we determine by our perceptions of the situation or experience that presents itself and our intention to act. So here's intent popping up, right, as it does so often when we talk. This is not the concept of free will, though. Not that free will that is offered in the Judeo-Christian heritage. Though I will have to say, free will seems kind of confusing in the Judeo-Christian heritage when we are also told, oh, we are all a part of God's plan. Kind of takes away this whole free will idea. But it is the freedom to choose how you want to be, with clear understanding that how we choose to act is directly affected by what has happened or is happening at that moment. Dale Wright implies the concept of if when he uses the word deliberately. This is a word that speaks to motivation and mindfulness. Both are necessary for self-cultivation that comes with this freedom of choice that we have. Wright also wants us to recognize the fallacy behind the concept of free will, that there are circumstances beyond our control, that the universe will inject causal factors that will affect outcomes whether we come to recognize them or not. Important point. There are circumstances beyond our control, which is another reason why we really want to take control of as much of it as we can, right? We want to be in charge of our life, in charge of our transformation as much as we can. There is a dilemma faced by those of us seeking a spiritual path, and that is if we have the belief that we have free will or the ability to make decisions and take actions that are totally unaffected by anything but our own thoughts and intention. In other words, no outside influences at all. We are unique expressions of the universe, but we are not unique in the universe. In the process of the universe, we're just this link in the chain of causation. Most people are only conscious of a small portion of what they do. You know, the consequences of their actions and what happens to them. In the causal mix, we've got genetics and influences and cultural context and experiences that all become factors in our decision-making process, whether we recognize it or not. It is more logical to act from the basis that we have free choice in our own actions, reactions, and our perceptions, rather than this notion of free will. And further, we've got to be honest in our realization that our free choice is directly and indirectly affected by outside forces. Realizing the reality of the universe is a causal process, and the fact that what we do matters makes freedom of choice even more important. We've got to look at all the possible choices. We've got to look at the situation. And we even have to think about what are the possible results that may occur before we begin engaging in freedom of choice. And we want to do this if we want results that will engender human flourishing. So we have a lot of work to do along with this freedom of choice. We have a responsibility. Freedom is in being aware of how we are, in being mindful of how we want to be, and being mindful of how our actions become part of the causal process. Because again, those are the only actions we can control, that we have any control over, is our own. In Buddhist practice, predeterminism, fate, or preordination These things are just non-existent in the way we think as Buddhists. As only one element in the causal process, we don't have complete control over what happens to us. We can determine how we perceive and react to situations, though. That is a freedom of choice. A practitioner looks to the Eightfold Path as a guide to gaining an appropriate view and to deciding whatever the appropriate action might be. There is no agency, there's no being, there's no book that has our birth and our death and all that good stuff in between mapped out for us. We are the writers of our own story. But, like James Patterson books these days and many others, we have other authors to our story. Let's call them co-authors, maybe. Right? All these outside influences and outside causal factors. But in the end, we take those outside influences and we write our story, interdependent and interconnected with them. Now we know, hopefully through experience, that a negative experience doesn't have to result in continued suffering. We have the freedom to choose to see past sadness and past depression to what can be if we apply positive thinking and action to create opportunities to positively affect our life. If we can realize the reality of the three characteristics of existence, for example, impermanence, suffering, and the not-self, and put those concepts into our moment-to-moment thinking, we can attain a level of freedom. We free ourselves from the psycho-emotional suffering brought about by anxiety and by worrying about life and death and fear of being disconnected. No matter the situation or experience, we know that these things are only temporary, that they will pass, and that we have the means and opportunity to change it. And really important is we have the potential in ourselves to take action if we choose to do so. As well as a positive experience shouldn't result in attachment either, because we have the freedom to see the impermanence in emotions such as joy and gladness, and to recognize that those too are going to pass away or pass by. And so that can lead us to enjoying the positive moment and then letting it go if we choose to. Again, our responsibility. Once we can come to recognize personal psycho-emotional freedom, we can offer ourselves as examples of the empowerment of that freedom to others. Without the hindrances of unsatisfactoriness and discontent and anguish, and with the knowledge that what we do, whether it's positive, negative, or neutral, matters. We gain the freedom to be an effective social self. We can commit ourselves to a path of social virtuosity by focusing on what we can do for others, as well as what we can do for ourselves. In engaging this if factor, it is our responsibility to view the situation with an encompassing and corrective lens. A lens that sees the situation as it is and endeavors to make the best choice possible. And if presented with a choice that leads to a selfish result, or one that is selfless, we have the freedom of choice to take the selfless route. It is in the realizing of connectedness and how, through our own freedom of choice, we can make decisions that lead to encompassing human flourishing, that we can also realize a path to moments of enlightenment. What about, though, when we engage freedom of choice and we mess up? We make a wrong decision. We take a wrong action. we have another choice to make, and we have freedom to make this choice or not. We can then choose to set aside feelings of guilt and shame, and then if we're presented with a similar situation again, we can make a better choice. Freedom of choice is a vehicle. It's a vehicle that can give ourselves permission to try again, to do better next time, and to have a positive effect on those around us. Freedom of choice, when applied with mindfulness and clarity, it's a powerful tool of the Dharma. When we feel pushed into a corner and experience the thought that we have no choice now but to react negatively, we can stop. We can put distance. We can let the awareness of our freedom of choice arise and endeavor with it to make the choice that leads to encompassing harmony and corrective action. The freedom the Buddha offers is one that can be realized in this life if the noble path is walked with courage, commitment, and the wisdom that arises in each of us through a combination of knowledge and practice and experience. So again, here's a subject that was chosen a while back. Now in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic, this idea of freedom has popped up again in a dangerous way we need to accept. And that is very simply in this idea of wearing a mask in public. People say, but it's my freedom to not wear one. And they're absolutely right. They have the freedom of choice not to wear one. But so many of these folks are not taking into account all these other causal factors around them. Right? They have the freedom of choice not to wear a mask, but do they have the freedom of choice to endanger others by not wearing a mask? No. So in this time of this pandemic, be mindful and be aware of these exhortations of freedom that people are throwing forward to say, I'm free to do this, this, and this. Are they taking into account, seemingly, the causal factors that will occur with their actions? I want each of us to always be aware of those causal factors. Always be aware that we are a causal factor. And that if by simply wearing a mask, we can become less of a negative causal factor for others, then we darn sure ought to be wearing a mask. And I'm just using mask as an example. We could use staying isolated for an example. So you can look at what's going on around you and see these choices being made under the guise of freedom. Are they wholesome choices that are wholesome to that person and others, or not? But in the end, the most important person to look at is yourself. How are you engaging your own freedom of choice? Are you making good choices or not so good choices? Are you in each moment striving to make that better choice? Because you do have the freedom of choice to do so.